Masechet Megilah, Daf Tet Vav 15. We are continuing with our agadot and explanations of Pesukim in Megillat Esther. The last thing we mentioned were that there were 9 Nevi'im that were all descendants from Rahav. And we noticed that some of them are well known, like Yirmiyah, but then it also mentions his father, Chilkiah. And so we're wondering about, or Baruch, who we know, and then his father also, Neriah. So we're wondering about the fathers here, because we know that the sons were Nevi'im, but how do we know about their fathers? So that's our first question. In that list, we know that the sons are explicitly said to be Nevi'im, but how do we know that their fathers were also Nevi'im? Ula taught that anytime you see the name of a Navi, and the Pasuk also mentions the name of that person's father, then you can be sure that the father was also a Navi and taught his son. It's inherited. And otherwise, why mention the name of the father? If, on the other hand, it does not mention the name of the father, Shemo velo Shem Aviv, then you can be sure that the father was not a prophet, and that's why he's left out. Just that person is a Navi. Similarly, a lot of times in Navi, it will say where he's from. If he says he's from a certain city, then you know he's from that city. But it mentions the prophet's name, but not the name of the city where he's from. Then you can assume that he was from Yerushalayim. This is the honor we give to Jerusalem, that we assume that prophecy comes from Yerushalayim. Now, b'matnita tana, kol shema'asav ma'aseh avotav situmin, uferet achar katuv b'echad mehem l'shevach kegon. So now that we're talking about lineages, anytime that Pasuk does not say anything about the actions of a certain person or their father, but it does mention someone along the line, something about someone in the lineage for good, then you can be sure that everybody in that lineage is good. Kegon, Devad Adonai Asher Hayal Sefanya ben Kushi ben Gedalia Biadushu Sadiq ben Sadiq. So since Sefanya, we know, was a righteous man, he was a Navi, and even though it mentions his father and his grandfather, we don't know anything about them, we can assume that it's mentioning them for good also. Yishmael ben Netanya ben Elishama biyadua shu rasha ben rasha. And similarly, if you don't know anything about a person, but somewhere in their lineage is someone evil, then you can assume that the Torah is telling you about their father, grandfather, because they are related not only biologically but also ethically. And so with Yishmael, this is the one who killed Gedaliah, and why we fast on some Gedaliah, evil man, murderer, and it mentions his father and his grandfather. So this would be an insult if there were good people to relate them to Yishmael, and therefore you can assume that they were deserving of being related to him. Amar Rav Nachman, Malachi ze Mordechai, speaking about the identifying and relations of another Navi, a Navi Malachi. There's a whole book of Treasar for him. Who is he? We're going to see 3 identifications. One says it is in fact Mordechai. They both lived in the Persian period. Malachi was one of the last of the Nevi'im. He was called that because he was second in command, and so his name is related to Melech Malachi because he was such a high up officer. So he was not only a Navi, if he was in fact Mordechai, then he was also a high up officer. Baruch ben Neriah Usraya ben Maaseya Bedaniel Mordechai Bilshan Chagai v'Zechariah u'Malachi kolan nitnabu b'shanat shetayim l'Daryavesh. Here we have a challenge to Rav Nachman's opinion. We have a braita that says that all these people prophesied in the 2nd year of Daryavesh. And if you notice, it mentions both Mordechai and Malachi. If they were the same person, then you wouldn't mention both of them. So to Yufta, we reject Rav Nachman's opinion that Malachi is the same as Daniel. Instead, we have two other opinions. Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha. Malachi ze Ezra. You see the word Malachi, it sounds like it could mean a messenger, like Malach, right? My messenger, my Malach, and therefore perhaps not a personal name. And so Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha is saying it's in fact the same as Ezra. HaSofer, v'chamim omerim Malachi shemo. V'chamim say, no, Malachi doesn't mean my messenger. That's the name of the prophet. He's an independent person, not anybody else that you know. That sounds like that's the Peshat. Amar Rav Nachman, Mistabera Kemanda Amar Malachi ze Ezra. But Rav Nachman, who's the same one that said before it was Mordechai, he says, you know what? I agree with the opinion that says Malachi is Ezra, because they do the same thing. Dichtib ben viut Malachi, Bagada Yehuda v'Torah nasta b'Yisrael b'Shulam ki chelel Yehuda kodesh Adonai asher ohev u'ba'al bat el nechar. Malachi, in one of his prophecies, says Yehuda has done bad in Israel because Yehuda they did a sanctification. They profaned God's name by marrying bat el nechar, foreign daughters of foreign gods. They married out. They intermarried. Now, who was so involved in stopping intermarriage? Manafresh nashim goyot Ezra tichtiv ayan shechanya ben Yechiel ben bnei Alam. Ve'omer la Ezra anachnu ma'alnu be'Elohenu v'anosheb nashim nochriyot. Right, this person Shechania comes to Ezra and says, we have done a bad thing. We have married foreign women. And Ezra says, okay, you have to leave them. And so you see that Malachi was complaining about intermarriage, and Ezra also was stopping intermarriage, and therefore it makes sense that they were the same person. Good. Tenor Banan, Arba Nashim Yefefiot Hayu Ba'olam. Okay, now this is going back to what we mentioned yesterday about the 7 prophetesses, and also about Rachav and how she was so beautiful. And so it says, and there was 4 very, very beautiful women in the world: Sarav, Abigail, Rachav, Esther. These are the 4 as we mentioned yesterday. Ulman damar Esther yerak roket haita, but we saw an opinion that Esther was green or greenish because her name was Hadassah, a myrtle, and a myrtle is green. And so she had this kind of a Middle Eastern darker complexion, and which could be nice or maybe not. And so according to one, that she was not the most beautiful, so we have to switch her out. Mapik Esther me'ayel Vashti. Perhaps instead Vashti was one of the 4 beautiful women. Tenor Rabbanan Rachab bishma zinta. This is a midrash we already saw back on in Ta'anit Daf Dalid. We saw that Rachav, she could even cause people to sin just by her name. Yael bekola, Avigail bezichrata, Michal bat Shaul bereiyata. Rachav caused people to think impure thoughts by her name. Yael, if someone heard her voice, they became excited. Avigail, if someone remembered seeing her, and Michal, the daughter of Shaul, if someone looked at her, then they would become excited. Rabbi Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Kol Amar Rachav miyad nikri. This is what we saw back in Masechet Ta'anit. Anyone who even says the name of Rachav's name, will immediately have a seminal emission. Amar le Rav Nachman, Ana amina Rachav v'la achpat li. Rav Nachman says, oh, I could say it all day long. See, Rachav, nothing happens to me. I'm above that. Amar le ki kamina biod al makira. Says, no, I only meant if someone who knows her and recognizes her. If you know her and then you mention her name, then you'll think about her. So it doesn't apply to you, Rav Nachman. You're living way after Rachav lived in the time of Yehoshua, so you don't know her. That's why her name is not meaningful to you. All right, and now after that we go back to the Pisukim and continue discussing them. Mordechai yadat kol asher na'asa. Mordechai learned about all the things that had happened, that Haman made this decree to kill all the Jews, and he rents his clothes and sits in the city. My Amad, and what he says, and what did he say? He let out a bitter cry. Saka gedola umara. What did he cry out? Rav Amar Gava Haman me'Achashverosh. She says, oh no, this is terrible. Haman has become more important than Achashverosh. Achashverosh gives Haman the ring, and so now there's no stopping him. Ushmuel Amar Gavar Malkai La'am Malkat Tata'a. Shmuel says that Mordechai cried out that the upper king has become more important than the lower king. What he really means is a euphemism. It means the opposite, that Achashverosh has become, as if to say, more powerful than God in heaven, because he is threatening to wipe out God's people, and God is not doing anything about it. Vatitchalchal hamalka, and in response also, the queen heard about what was going on, and she became very distressed. Mai vatitchalchal, what does that mean? Amarav shepersa nida. Either that she immediately became a nida, or that her bowels were loosened because of her fear. She was not able to control her bodily functions. Vatikra Esther lehatach, and then Esther calls Hatach, one of the king's officers that was in charge, and she sends him to Mordechai to give him regular clothes and not be sitting in sackcloth. Amar Rav Hatach ze Daniel, and so the way the Midrash always likes to associate people, and so Hatach is the same as Daniel. It was called Hatach, meaning cut down, because during the time of the Babylonians, the Daniel was very high up. He was the highest advisor to Nebuchadnezzar, and now he was a lower minister. So he was cut off from his greatness. Shmuel says it for good, that everything in the kingdom was decided by his words. He's Hatach, because he's the decider, even for the Persians. Esther sent Hatach to find out what's going on. Tell me the details. Why are you sitting in sackcloth and crying out? Amar bi Yitzchak shalcha lo shema abru Yisrael al chamisha chumshe Torah tichtiv bahen mizeh umizeh hem ketuvim. Okay, so Midrash is making a relation between the words zev al mazeh. She asked, "What is this about? What is going on?" And we relating this to what it says in Matan Torah, when the two luchot were given. It says mizeh umizeh, that they were written on both sides. So she said in her message, she worried, did Bnei Israel violate the Torah, the 5 books of the Torah that are written on the tablets, mizeh umizeh? Ve'gidu Mordechai tibre Esther. And then it says, after that, Mordechai sends back a message with Hatach and says, listen, you better go and plead with the king on our behalf. And she says back to Hatach, I can't go, because I'm not invited, and I have to be invited, otherwise I will get killed. I'm only invited once a year. Okay, after that, you would expect it to say that Hatach took that message of Esther saying, no, I can't help, and he would say it back to Mordechai. But instead it says, Vayagidu in plural. They told to Mordechai the words of Esther. Why they? Hatach himself did not go. And we learn from here that you never want to be the reporter of bad news, and to go back, for Hatach to go back and say, oh, sorry, she said no. So Hatach is like, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. So he got a bunch of people to go and explain it to Mordechai. Lech kenoset kol haYehudim. Finally, Mordechai told her, right, you better go, or else you and your father's house will be destroyed, and we will find salvation from somewhere else. And then they said, okay, so it's fine, I will go, but I need backing, I need support, and go bring all the Jews together to fast for 3 days. Ad asher lo kadat, and then she says, and I will go to the king, not according to the law. Now, the simple reading of this is not according to the law of the Persians, right? That the king says you're only allowed to come. You're on a schedule. She only can come to be with the king on according to the regular appointment, not anytime she wants. Rabbi Abba interprets it not that she's violating not only Persian custom but Torah law. She's saying Usually, whenever I come, I'm forced to, right? The king, I have to come to the king because he invited me, and otherwise, he'll kill me. So I have to be with the king. I don't want to be, but because it's even though it's zinut, but it's forced, so she's not responsible. But now I am willingly going to the king, and I'm going to sleep with him. And so now this is committing adultery willingly. So therefore, and because as a consequence of that, just as I have been lost to my father's house ever since I married the king, now I can no longer, spend time with my family. And now I will be separated from you also. Until that, remember we saw that she would go and be with Mordechai too, because she was forced with Achashverosh, so it doesn't count. But now if she's willingly committing adultery, she can no longer go back and be with Mordechai. ויעבור מרדכי, אמר רב שהעביר יום ראשון של פסח בתענית. So it says Mordechai passed. Passed what? Well, past could mean passed by. It could also mean violated a law. And what did he violate? Well, if you look at the calculation, the whole story started when Mordechai, when this decree comes out, is on the 13th of Nisan. So no, that means they're fasting on the 13th, 14th, and 15th of Nisan, which is Pesach. And so they had to violate Pesach by not eating masah and having a meal, but instead fasting. That was the third day of fasting. Shmuel says, no, it literally means passing. He passed over a stream. There was a stream through Shushan, and in order to bring the message to the rest of the Jewish people to start fasting, he had to pass through a stream. We saw this midrash already yesterday, but this is the actual source of it. On the third day, she wore royalty. Should say she wore clothing of royalty. What does that mean? She wore royalty. רוח הקודש כתיב אחר בתלבש וכתיב בתם ורוח לבשה את עמסי. It means that she was adorned with divine inspiration, because with Amasai and Diremim, it also says that a spirit enclosed him, meaning a spirit of prophecy. And so that's what it means regarding Esther also, not clothing of royalty, but rather just royalty, just a spirit of prophecy. Okay, this statement was said by Rabbi Elazar in the name of Rabbi Hanina. Once he said one statement, we're going to quote a list of about 8 statements by the same sage. So here we go with the list. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Hanina, Leolam alti birkat hejot, kala be'anecha. I also taught that you should always take seriously a blessing, even if it's from a hejot, meaning a lay person. Certainly, if an important person gives you a blessing, all right, the chief rabbi, that's a nice blessing. But even if a commoner gives you a blessing, it should not be light in your eyes. Two great people two greatest of the generation were blessed by 2 common people. And the blessing came true. Here's the examples. David de Barche Aravna. All the way at the end of Sefer Shemuel, David goes and buys the vineyard of Aravna, and that's where he's going to build the Bet HaMikdash, where the Bet HaMikdash will be built. And Aravna is a nice guy, and he blesses David. Dichtiv V'yomer Aravna El HaMelech, and he says, right, may Hashem be with you and accept your prayers. At that time, there was a plague running through, and the plague stopped. So you see that even though this is David, the king, he is blessed by a commoner, and yet the blessing of the commoner comes true. Daniel de Barachet Daryavesh Tichtiv Elahachti Ant Palach Bid-tira hu yeshez binach. Daniel, he was the great one. He was the great seer, dream interpreter, advisor, and he's blessed by the king. Here is ironically calling the king Daryavesh a commoner, because in Jewish terms he's just a commoner, and he blesses Daniel and says, your God, who you serve continually, should rescue you. And sure enough, Daniel was rescued from the lion's den. Same sage, next statement. הנה הוא לך כסות עיניים, ויתקיים בזרעה. So too, the curse of a common person should not be light in your eyes, because after all, Avimelech, he was an important person, but in Jewish terms, he was a commoner, and he cursed Sarah after he took her, he kidnapped Sarah, and then he found out that she was actually Abraham's wife. He sends them away with a lot of riches, and he gives her jewelry, and he says, this will be for you a covering of the eyes. Now in Peshat, it could mean a good thing. This will be some kind of diadem on your eyes. So this is a nice thing, go away. But it could also be a negative thing, that this should cover your eyes, right? Just like you tricked me and said you were his sister and you covered my eyes, so too your eyes should be covered. That was a curse, and it came true, not with her, but with her son, Yitzchak. Because when Yitzchak was old, his eyes were dim, and then the whole story that happened because of Yitzchak's blindness. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, bo ur'eh shelo k'midat HaKadosh Baruch Hu midat basar adam. Midat basar adam, adam shofet kedera ואחר כך נותן לתוכה מים, אבל הקדוש ברוך הוא נותן מים, ואחר כך שופט הקדרה. Unrelated to anything before, he says, look how Hashem is so much greater than a human being. A human being, if he wants to cook something, first he has to go and get the pot, and then he puts the water in the pot. That makes sense. But Hashem, you know what he could do? He could get the water first, put the water, let it suspend in midair, and then bring the pot and put it on around the water afterwards. Where do we see that? Hashem first puts the water in heaven, and then and then he brings the vapors, the clouds that hold the water. So see, you can have the water first and then the holder of the water afterwards. The famous statement, whoever says something in the name of its original author brings redemption to the world, because when Mordechai found out about the plot of Bigdan Vateresh to kill the king, he told Esther, and Esther told Achashverosh in the name of Mordechai. And because of that, it was written in the records that Mordechai is the one that saved the king. If Esther had not done that, then in the rest of the story, when he couldn't sleep and check the books, he would not have found Mordechai's name there, and then he wouldn't have given Mordechai honor, and the whole rest of the story of redemption could not have happened. So you see that always important to say something in the author's name, and I guess that's appropriate that we are bringing a series of 8 items in the name of Rabbi Elazar and in the name of Rabbi Chanina, who is the author of this very statement. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Chanina, Tzadik Abad Ledoro Abad. משל אדם שעבדה לו מרגלית, כל מקום שהיא מרגלית שמה, לא עבדה אלא לבעלה. He says when a righteous person passes away, he passes away, and it's a loss of that generation. The generation that has a Sadiq in its midst, it's good for them. But it's not bad for the Sadiq that he dies, because he'll have his world to come. And what is this similar to? Someone who loses a pearl. So the person that had the pearl and lost it, he feels the loss. But the pearl itself is valuable anywhere it is. Whoever finds it, right? The value of the pearl doesn't go away just because one person lost it. And so too, the value of a Sadiq remains forever, even though that generation will no longer have access to him. And now back to Haman, who says, all this is worth nothing. Right, everything I have is worth nothing if Mordechai won't bow down to me. And continuing with Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, B'sha'ah she'ra Haman et Mordechai yoshev b'shar hamelech, Amar kol zeh enenu shoveh li k'derav chista. What was Haman specifically referring to? It says when Haman saw Mordechai sitting at the king's gate. Why did it bother him that he was sitting at the king's gate? And he said, nothing is worth it if this guy won't bow down to me. Well, we can explain it according to Rav Chisda. Damar Rav Chisda, ze ba bepros buli, ze ba befroz buti. Okay, it means this one, Mordechai, he comes from a heritage of a rich person, whereas this person, he's referring to himself, Haman, I come from a poor person, from poor lineage. And so he's always reminding me of my humble backgrounds, and that bothers me. Amar of Papa v'karule avda demizdaban betalmeh. He was called, Haman was called the slave who was sold for a loaf of bread. Okay, this is part of a whole story that's not mentioned in the Talmud Bavli, but is mentioned in other midrashim that says that they used to, Haman and Mordechai were once army officers together, and Haman squandered all his money, and then he was hungry for bread. And Mordechai said, okay, I will give you bread if I can buy you as a slave. And Haman had no choice, and he sold himself as a slave, and Mordechai still held out that bill of servitude. Remember, you are my slave. And so that's the humble beginnings, the poor beginnings. He's really owned by Mordechai. Okay, this word peruz buli and peruz buti, it sounds like peruz bol. It seems to have something to do with a debt collection statement, right? A term of indebtedness, which is what peruz bol is about. And that's the point. He's saying, you owe me, you are owned by me. Mordechai would always remind Haman, and that's what he's referring to. Zeh, I can't stand this guy. Okay. Or another interpretation, when he says, all this is not worth it to me. A lot of times when you see the word zeh in a pasuk, the Midrash always wants it to be referring to something that you can see and point to. And so the zeh is that Haman had a list of all of his treasures engraved on his heart, and he would say zeh, right? Look at all the things I own. And so when he saw Mordechai, he says zeh, everything that I own, all the houses and riches, is worth zero to me, because I can't get respect from this Mordechai. Same stage again. In the future, God himself will be like a crown on the head of every righteous person. Okay, we're going to start now a long midrash on Yeshaya 28:5, 6, and 7. These three pisukim. The pisukim are talking about in the future, Hashem will be ateret sevi litzfirat tifara lishad amo. It will be a diadem for the remnant of his people, for Bnei Israel. Ruach mishpat liyoshev al mishpat. God will be a spirit of judgment for judges who sit in judgment. Valigbura meshiveh milchama sha'ara. And Hashem will be valor for those who repel attacks at the gate, meaning Hashem will give midah keneged midah to great leaders, judges, and fighters. And then the next pasuk seems negative. Even among them were those who were drinking wine and became drunk by liquor, and they were dazed, made mistakes. Kohen v'navi shagu b'shechad nibleu min hayayin ta'u min hashechad. They went astray because of the wine and the liquor. Shagu b'ro'eh paku pililiya. And we're going to see what those words mean. They stumbled in judgment. Okay, so what is these pasukim talking about? Two that are positive, and then the third one is negative. The Midrash is going to show it's a conversation between the attribute of justice and Hashem. Okay, so my later tifara. What do those words mean? Laosin sivyono ulmaspin tifarto. Hashem will be a diadem, crown of glory for those who who do His will. That's sivyono, right? And those who wait for His glory. That's mitzapin tifarto. That's the tifara, right? Those who wait for trust in Hashem, they will see that glory. Yachol lakol. Will this apply to everyone? No. Talmud lomar lishad amo l'mishem esim asmo kishirayim. Only to the remnant, to someone who makes himself humble, like a remnant. only they will see the glory. To those who judge, the pshat sounds like it's talking about those who are judges, and they judge righteously. They bring justice to the earth. But here it's referring to someone who is able to judge himself and keep his evil spirit in control. And someone sitting in judgment, that refers to someone who does true justice. True justice means that he follows the proper procedure, is not corrupt. And one who is strong, this doesn't mean strong that he fights enemies in the gate, which is the pashat, but rather, right, ezu gibor, that he can overcome his own inclination. And again, the Midrash is always taking army terminology and using it for internal battle and for the battle of Torah. So those who fight in battle gloriously, that's those who are discuss and argue words of Torah. Sha'ara, in the gate, that this is referring to Torah scholars who come early to the gates of the Bate Knesiot and Bate Midrashot. And here we have the conversation. The attribute of justice comes to Hashem and says, why are you giving the Jews all this great glory and reward? What's the difference between the Jews and the non-Jews? Because Israel studies Torah, the other nations do not. The attribute of justice now comes with the third pasuk and says, they also drink and have problems, and focusing on the last two words, paku means to stumble, not just any stumbling that would be deserving of Gehinam. And this is from the pasuk we saw yesterday regarding Abigail tells David, don't sin and kill Naval, and this will be a stumbling block for you. And so that refers to Gehinam. And Pidiliya refers the same word as, this is when two men fight and they cause miscarriage to a woman, and they have to pay her according to what the judges determine. Judges is called pililim, so pililiya means judgment, and so this is attribute of justice, turning to Hashem and saying, these people also made mistakes and were drunk with wine and so on, and therefore they will be judged negatively for Gehinam. Okay, that's the end of the statements of Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Chanina. And then we go to the next pasuk. So Esther now is going to go and see the king uninvited, and she is all nervous. And she's standing in the inner courtyard. Pasuk here reminds us of going into the inner courtyard of Kodesh Kodashim, the Kohen Gadol does once a year, and he's always very nervous about that. And there's a lot of parallels between the Achashverosh's palace and the Kodesh Kodashim. And so Amar Rabbi Levi, we saw before that she was robed with divine inspiration, but when she was passing through the hall of idols, so then Shekhinah left her, because Shekhinah doesn't like to be around idols. And now she is all even more worried. And she says, Amra, Eli, Eli, Lama azabtani. She says, God, why have you forsaken me? This is from Mizmor 22, which is the Mizmor that we recite on Purim. So we're putting this in her words. Hashem, you left me. Hashem, why did you leave me? Is it because you're blaming me for going and now willingly being with Achashverosh, and you're judging me for unintentional, like intentional, for something forced, like as if I'm doing it willingly? Even though I am technically going and volunteering to be with the king now and sleep with him, but it's really forced. I'm only doing it to save the Jewish people. Or Shema al shekerativ kerev. Are you upset that I called him a dog? Truth is, Achashverosh, it did act like a dog, but nevertheless, her point was he's a king, so even a king who's evil you have to give a certain amount of respect to. Is that why you're upset? And this is all deriving from the Pesukim themselves, where the Mizmor says, deliver me from the dog, and this would refer to Achashverosh. So in the next pasuk, Chazra Ukra'atu Aryeh, Shnemar Hoshi'ani mipi Aryeh. In the very next pasuk, it says, save me from a lion. All right, it's still a vicious animal, but it's a more respectful name for a vicious animal than a dog. Okay, so is that why? I mean, the rabbis are reading the Mizmor 22 and fitting in what might have been going through her mind. The next pasuk says, when the king saw Queen Esther, she obtained favor in his sight, and the king held out his scepter in his hand. That's a way of saying, I accept, right? When he holds out the scepter, that means, yes, you can come in and speak to me. Yochanan says, 3 angels came and helped her at that very moment. One of them raised up her neck so she could stand straight. One of them brought a divine a cord of grace around her so she would look beautiful, and one that caused the king's scepter to stretch out in acceptance of her. Now remember, she was fasting for 3 days, and so it was hard for her to even stand up straight. She was looking not a little disheveled there. So the angels made her look better so that he would be willing to accept her. If you look in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of Esther, you'll find there a whole prayer that Esther says, and a whole scene that is not found in the Hebrew version and in the regular Tanakh. And in that scene, first of all, she has a whole prayer, which she doesn't have, and here you have a whole prayer also. And over there also, she comes to the king and she faints and she says, "Oh, what is it? And what can I do for you?" She has a whole like a maiden in distress, and that arouses his compassion. And she has to be held up there also. Anyway, there's a lot of parallels in this. So this midrash is answering a lot of the same questions that the Greek translators also had, and filling it in a lot of the same ways. And definitely looks like this midrash and the Greek translation are borrowing traditions from the same place, even if they don't know each other directly. Okay, that's all to Sam's point, who pointed that out in the chat. And how much, how long, how far? Here's a scepter of a Persian king, and so how long was his scepter, and how long did it stretch to? Normally, it was only 2 cubits long, and it stretched to be 12 cubits long. Some say 16, some say 24. But al shishim, and the Braita says it stretched to be 60 amot. And similarly, Parashat HaShavua, when Bat Par'ah stretched out her hand, as she says, the Peshat is that she sent her Ama, she sent her maidservant. Just like in English, you could say my hand or handmaid, right? But hand could also mean actual hand. And so the Midrash says that she didn't want to send someone else. She did it herself, and her hand stretched out and took the baby and stretched very far. And so too the teeth of evildoers, like fangs, Hashem causes them to be broken. That's the pasuk says broken. But Shakish says, don't read broken, but rather shiribabta, you stretched, you enlarged. So you can imagine this, evil guy with fangs, and his teeth get so long that they just get in the way and he gets stuck on things. And there's a whole midrash about that too. Rabba bad Ofran amar mishum Rabbi Elazar. And back to the Sharvit of Achashverosh, he heard from his teacher's teacher that it didn't grow just 60, but 200 cubits. Okay, you can take this scepter literally, but there are some who take this as a euphemism, and I'll let you figure out what for. ויאמר לה המלך לאסתר המלכה, מה בקשתך עד חצי המלכות ותעש. And so now that the king found favor and Esther, he says, what can I do for you? I will give you up to half of the kingdom. Not more, because then he won't be king anymore. חצי המלכות ולא כל המלכות, I'll give you half, but not the whole. Also will not give you anything that will cause a split, a barrier in the middle of the kingdom. Don't ask to build the Bet HaMikdash, and this follows the midrashic chronology that the story of Megillat Esther happened during the exile, even though historically, again, Achashverosh lived after Dariavish rebuilt the Bet HaMikdash. Okay, Yavo HaMelech veHaman el HaMishteh. And what's Esther's request? A small one. Let the king and Haman come to a banquet that I have prepared. And now here's a big question. Why did Esther invite Haman? If her whole point was to plead on behalf of her people to Achashverosh, and she says, listen, I have to have a serious meeting with you because I have to tell you about something, right, that my people is in trouble. Why would she invite Haman to the banquet? It was a great question. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Pachim Tamnalo. We're going to see a series of answers, all of them very insightful. One is that she's setting up a trap for him. As Pasuk says, their table should be a trap for them, that some invite him to a banquet and she'll be able to somehow get him to say or do something that will incriminate him. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, she learned the pasuk from her father's house, even though her father died, but she had relatives, and who taught her this pasuk: if your enemy is hungry, give him bread to eat. In other words, be nice even to your enemies, and who knows, maybe you can get on their good side or somehow use that to your advantage. Better than keeping your enemy far, and then they'll be against you. Keep them close. Rabbi Meir Omer, she did not want a Haman to make a rebellion against Achashverosh because she thought that he would be successful. And there are hints that he, in fact, was moving, putting himself in position to take over the whole kingdom. And so if she met with Achashverosh privately, Haman would be like, what's going on there? What are they plotting? You know what? I better go ahead and make a rebellion. So by including Haman, that would keep him in his place. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, he didn't want anyone to suspect that she was Jewish. And so by inviting Haman, see how she relates to Haman. And if Haman decreed to kill all the Jews, and she's inviting Haman, obviously she's not Jewish. Not only did she not want Haman or any of the officers to find out that she was Jewish, she didn't want the Jewish people to know that she was to think that she was Jewish or to think that they had an in. Because if the people heard, oh, Esther, Esther's going to meet with Achashverosh, she'll plead on our behalf, the problem is taken care of. And then they will not continue fasting and praying and asking for mercy. So she didn't want them to think that, to know what she was doing. So she invited Haman. So everybody was like, I don't know what she's doing. She's not going to be any help. She wanted to keep her eye on Haman and for him to be in front of her, and him to be in front of her all the time, right? Keep your enemies closer. Keep an eye out on him. And another reason is that she wanted Hashem to look and say, look how she has to degrade herself and sit and act as if act politely, right? Really hard. Could you imagine having a meal with some great anti-Semite who's trying to kill everybody, and you have to make believe that you're friendly with them and have a whole meal with them? So maybe Hashem will see that, and that will arouse his mercy. Rabbi Yoshua ben Korcha Omer, Asbir lo panim kedei sheyehareg hu vehi. This is a very interesting answer. She says, Esther says, I'm going to flirt with Haman in front of Achashverosh. and then he will suspect us of having an affair, and then Achashverosh will kill Haman and Esther. And Esther was willing to give up her life just so that Haman would be killed also, right? Really fascinating. And you see, in the end, he does find them Haman fallen on the bed with her. Okay, Rabban Gamliel Omer, Melech Hafachfechan Haya. Rabban Gamliel says he was a fickle king, and so maybe if he kept seeing Haman again and again, he would change his mind and say, "Oh, you know what? Forget it. You can't do that." But you want to give more opportunities for a fickle person to change their mind. Amar Rabban Gamliel, after all those answers, Rabban Gamliel says, you know what? We need Rabbi Eliezer HaModai. The Tanya Rabbi Eliezer HaModai, Omer, kin'atu b'melech, kin'atu b'sarim. Really, what she wanted to do is make the king jealous of Haman and the other ministers jealous of Haman. The king would be like, hey, why did she invite Haman? Everybody else, why invite Haman? And by doing that, everybody now is suspicious of Haman and wondering about him. In fact, that makes a lot of sense because, right, she doesn't actually ask for anything in that first a meal, but only asks for a second meal together with Achashverosh and Haman. And that really gives everyone time, especially Achashverosh, time to think about what's going on with this, right? And and feel jealousy against him. Rabba Amar Lifnei Sheber Gaon. Another reason is what the pasuk says, before pride goes before destruction. So first she wants to raise Haman's pride up. Oh, Haman, see, look, she invited only the king and me. See how important I am? And like in every movie, before the downfall of the villain, he's all prideful. Similarly, a pasuk in Yirmiyah, when they are heated, I'll make a feast for them. I'll make them drunk. So a person gets invited, becomes haughty, gets drunk, and then that prepares their downfall. Ashkached Abba bar Abu leEliyahu, and that Abba bar Abu once found Eliyahu Navi and asked him, what's the real answer? We just saw a whole series of reasons why Esther invited Haman to the banquet. What's the real reason? Eliyahu can tell us up in Shamayim, and Eliyahu says, all of the above, all the Tanaim and all Amoraim, every answer is correct. She made all those calculations, and in fact, they all have merit. Okay, Haman goes and he's all proud and he recounts his glory of his riches and many children. How many children actually did he have? Rav says 30 kids. And you see, they all came to bad endings. 10 died, 10 were died in childhood, 10 were hung, as we read in Megilah Esther, and 10 became beggars. Rabbanan Amri Otan Shemachazir Petachim Shivim Havya. Rabbanan says no, there were 70 who became beggars. Yichtiv Sebe'im Balechem Niskaru Atikre Sebe'im Ela Shiv'im. And so Pasuk and Shema, those who were full. This is in Shirat Chana. Tefillat Chana says those who were full have to hire themselves out just to eat. So don't read Seve'im, but Shiv'im, referring to the 70 sons of Haman. Ve'rameh bar Abba Amar, Kulan Matayim Ushmona Havu. No, there weren't 70, there were 208 children of Haman. Shene'emar ve'rov banav ve'rov b'gimatria matan ba'al-besar rov banav. Because it's rov banav, and that gematria is 208. Hold on. If we take ve'rov b'gimatria as 214, not 208, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak ve'rov ketiv. No, it's written without a vav, right? Vav resh bet, without the emakriya, and so that is in fact 208. Okay, next pasuk. Balayla hu nadeda shanat hamelech. The key middle crux of the whole Megillah. On that night, the king lost his sleep. Amar Rabbi Tanchum nadeda shenat malko shel olam. Rabbi Tanchum says this is referring, Peshat is referring to what Achashverosh lost his sleep, and that's why he said, bring the book. But he says it's referring to the king of the universe, Hashem, lost his sleep, as if to say he was sleeping beforehand and not doing anything, not saving the Jewish people in their time of need. But now he woke up and did something about it. Rabbanan Ameri nadedu elyonim v'nadedu tachtonim. It says the higher ones, meaning the angels, their sleep was disturbed, and the low one, the Jewish people, was disturbed. Right, everybody was all worried about what's happening. Rava Amash and Rava says the Peshat, which is that Achashverosh couldn't sleep that night, which made sense. He's thinking about what was with that banquet, and why is there another banquet coming up? What is Haman up to? So what was he thinking that kept him up? Amar, my command is minte Esther leHaman. What is going on? What happened? Why did Esther invite Haman? Or maybe they're conspiring against me and they're going to kill me. Maybe Esther and Haman have a plot to kill me. Hadad Amar, wait, isn't there anyone who would inform me? Somebody would know about it, and somebody would tell me about this conspiracy. Hadad Amar, don't have anybody who I can trust, right? Maybe there's someone who did a favor for me and I didn't reward him properly, and that's why no one is telling me information. I have nobody, I have no allies on my side, right? Did it ever happen before that there was a plot against me and someone told me about it? Anybody I could really trust? And maybe I didn't reward them. Miyad, Vayomer Lavi et Sefer HaZichronot, Divrei Hayamim. And then immediately says, bring the book of records so that they can be read. And so he seems to remember something about there was some plot before. And so they see Esther's strategy was successful by inviting Haman there. That raises curiosity. What's going on here? Is something wrong? Is there a plot? Oh, I remember, wasn't there something? Isn't there anyone I could trust? Did someone ever go and save me? And he brings and finds out, sure enough, yes, in fact, it was Mordechai, and that unravels Haman's whole plan. And so you see that everything, the strategy works perfectly. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen ve'amen.